I haven't done that yet, but I'll have to give it a shot sometime.
It looks like it's ready to go.
Awesome.
Dan Englander is the CEO and founder of Sales Schema, a fractional business team for marketing agencies. Prior to founding Sales Schema, Dan was the first employee and the head of new business at Idea Rocket, as well as the account coordinator, as well as the. Try that again. Dan Englander is the CEO and founder of Sales Schema, a fractional business team for marketing agencies. And prior to that, he was the first employee to head new business at Idea Rocket, as well as the account coordinator at DX Agency. Dan currently and his team have executed about 7,000 campaigns. They've generated millions in lifetime revenue and 3,000 plus agency brand meetings for clients with companies like Birchbox and Stripe and Venmo. In addition to helping agencies grow, Dan has also made a name for himself as the host of his own podcast, the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. He's also the author of Master Account Management and the B2B Sales Blueprint. And today we're going to drill down on cold prospecting best practices via email, particularly in business-to-business segments. Dan, welcome to the B2B Lead Gen Podcast.
Eric, yeah, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's start it off. How can you tastefully open the door with new prospects via cold email?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's lots of tactics that I can get into, but I think the first starting place is kind of thinking about it a little more casually and simply than trying to get anyone to know, like, or trust you, or trying to get anyone to close business with you, and to go in with a goal of simply de-risking a conversation. So I think that can happen a lot of different ways, and I don't like to say there's just one way to do it. I think there's all sorts of ways that I can get into. But that's the first thing, is kind of have that mindset going in, and then I think from there, it's much easier to zero in on what it would take to simply de-risk a conversation. Mhm.
What does that mean, de-risk a conversation?
Yeah, I think it means a number of things. I think it basically means, making it out to the person that this is going to be a good use of his or her time, that it's not going to be a waste, that you're in their world, that that you're offering something of value. And sometimes the hurdle is simply about doing little things. So for example, our clients that tend to be focused and specialized, could be niched, may or may not be niched, tend to get better responses than people that aren't, so that's something that's a little bit outside of our control and what we do, but that definitely helps a lot, because then somebody's, like we all do, if somebody hits you up, you're always going to go to the website, spend 5 seconds doing a little research. And that conversation's now de-risked. If you don't have that luxury yet, then there's all sorts of other things you can do and tactics that I can get into. But one that's pretty simple is just starting out by perhaps having your LinkedIn profile header focus very tangibly on what you do. So I might be losing the question a little bit, but I think where we see things going is much more towards specificity, towards personalization, and in other ways like that, if that makes sense.
So but the thing is, often when you're selling, you may be selling to different audiences. And so I guess would you have to change your LinkedIn profile each time before you call someone? Because it's
Not
very
necessarily.
difficult, right? To go at a vertical. If you're a marketing agency and you serve different verticals and you want to market to a vertical and show that you're in their wheelhouse, how do you sort of change your presence so that it matches what you're telling them via email or on the phone?
Yeah. And then the LinkedIn thing is one particular example. That's not necessarily what everyone has to do. I think if you have the luxury of multiple salespeople, you might have one that verticalizes or something like that, but you don't have to do it. I think to take a step back, and I'm thinking bigger than just email, I'm thinking about direct outreach, right? The idea of knocking on doors in a tasteful way to get meetings with your target audience. I think there was a long time when that was more accessible to more companies, to more agencies, across the board. I think what's happened is, there's a lot more marketing companies, a lot more agencies, a lot more people selling things online. And then there's also this overall higher bar for competition for attention overall, right? And that's accelerated massively with literally, every white collar business going digital or near literally. So what that's meant for us and kind of what we're up to is much more personalization, which I think has made outbound a lot harder for lots of companies to do well. So, for example, I think we have to rethink how we do outreach. So instead of thinking about, okay, I want to talk to the CMO of these Fortune 500 companies, you might want to think about who is the person that's actually going to take the meeting with me. Because what used to work, or I think what used to work a lot better, was coming in from an angle of, okay, I'm going to position myself super well and come in with these case studies and come in with this heavy artillery, and the CMO is going to see it and they're going to say, sure, I'm going to talk to you. I think that's a lot harder, even if you're positioned really well. So what that means for us and what we're heading towards more is figuring out where our clients have personal commonalities, with perhaps the CTO, perhaps the head of HR, perhaps in an indirect way, and using kind of an indirect method to do it. So I think that if you are DIYing this, if you're doing outreach, another starting place might be to, you might pipe into your LinkedIn groups. You might look at companies or people that used to work for an account that as a client of yours that have since moved on, and contact those people. That may be a better way in and an easier bar for getting a meeting than lots of other things that you could do right now.
So if you're helping a digital marketing agency, because I know you work with agencies on business development, if you're advising a digital marketing agency, I mean, there's a lot of digital marketing agencies out there. What advice would you give them on how to qualify a potential lead before the outreach even happens?
Yeah, and I think that creates a lot of hand wringing. So, the word qualify is one of these words that I hate because everybody has a different definition of what it means. But I would say that the thing you want to do first is kind of look at where you're most likely to be successful and start from an account based level, right? So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel or do what we like to call day trading, where you're like, okay, what niche is going up or down or whatever, where's the money flowing? It's better to think about, where are you most likely to close? Where do you have the strongest testimonials, case studies, et cetera? And then from there, honing in on an account based level, what to identify the accounts that are really good. And I think that as part of that qualification process, you're basically zeroing in and doing some of that grunt work yourself if you've never done it before, because I think it's just a really useful exercise. So to answer your question, I think it's starting with what's been historically successful. And if you want to branch out, do it incrementally.
So once you've got your target list of the folks that you want to go after, is there a winning formula when structuring a cold email?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish there was. I wish there was one thing that you could do that's the silver bullet. I don't know if there is. I think there's commonalities that we've seen between the campaigns, and then we've had things that surprise us. Like brevity. Yeah, I think all things being equal, brevity is better, but we've had campaigns where the email's super long. Um, I think the winning formula these days is going to be more about small batch campaigns and personalization. So it used to be that there was this numbers game dynamic, and there still is. There still is a numbers game dynamic, but I think it's becoming a situation where you might want to be doing outreach to 50 people in a week, or who knows, maybe up to 100 or something like that. And then from there, you're including some element of personalization, or you're coming in with some sort of commonality. So, for example, like when we do outreach to agencies for our own business, we're referencing their clients. We're going on their portfolios and saying, "Hey, I glanced over your portfolio, saw you worked with so and so. Would you be open? We do this, that, and the third, and would you be open to a conversation?" And that tends to work really well. For clients, that's not always that easy, right? Because if we have a client that's reaching out to Toyota, okay, so what? Like, what do they care that we've looked at a news article that Toyota's put out, last week? So that might mean a different sort of personalization. That might be more of a personal commonality, a personal connection based thing. So maybe that means you're identifying C-level people that went to UCLA because you went, I don't know where you went, but because you went to UCLA as well. And then that means, okay, you might not be contacting the place you want to be ultimately, but you're contacting people that are high level, that can refer you, that can have a productive conversation with you, and that are more likely to actually take the call. So I think that's where things are heading. One thing I like to say to people if they're DIYing this is, start small, start simple, make just, first figure out those accounts, then figure out the people that are in high level positions that are more likely to take a call with you, and then get something out the door, start a campaign. Mhm.
Let's get into the weeds. I want to try to get some practical advice from you on email marketing and cold prospecting. So, is there a way to check to see if an email address is valid before you send to the email address?
Yes, there's a number of like data checking tools and that sort of thing that you can use. I think there's a whole bunch, and we're bouncing around and testing them all the time. So it's not to be coy. I just don't have a perfect rec. There's one called Bulk Email Checker that you can use, and a lot of these outbound tools have that technology built into them more and more these days. And your audience might be at different stages, but I think the important thing is if you're doing outreach, you want to be using, an outbound specific tool. You don't want to be using like a MailChimp or anything like that. So there's a whole bunch of those. There's reply.io. There's one called Airborne, which is built for teams. The fancy kind of heavyweight one is outreach.io. And that's more like kind of a HubSpot for outbound, I would say, to put it into a box, I guess. Yeah.
We had the VP marketing from Outreach on the show
Yeah.
a couple months back. I'll have a link in the show notes. Um, how do you find an email address for someone that you don't have their email address?
Yeah, so there's how we do it, and then how I think people that may never hire us that want to DIY this can do it. The way that we do is we have, there's lots of proprietary databases we're drawing from. We have individual list builders that can guess the convention. So, and that can be done a whole lot of different ways, and then that's validated. And if you think about it, most email conventions are pretty guessable. It's a combination of first initial, last name, or whatever. So there's different programs that you can put that through. I think for your listeners to hopefully be valuable, and do that the right way. There's lots of scraping tools. So I think if somebody was doing this on their own, we have a course about this that goes through it, that we're going to relaunch next week, called the Agency Lead Generation course. But there's one called Lead IQ. So you can basically be scraping the data from LinkedIn directly into an email platform or directly into a spreadsheet, which you then can upload. And it's finding business emails, which is ideal instead of personals. Because another tactical thing is a lot of the times there's if you're scraping data from LinkedIn, people will sign up with their personal emails, right? Which is not something you generally want to be contacting. So that's another thing is there's lots of scraping tools like that.
Well, we'll definitely include a link to the course in the show notes. So if you're interested in Dan's course, you'll be able to get that out on the blog.
Cool.
Just a pro tip, I use a tool called Contact Out, one word, and it's a browser widget that you can load into Chrome. And the way it works is if you have it on in your Chrome and you load a profile in LinkedIn, it actually gives you the personal email address and phone number of the person on that page. And most of the time, it's correct.
Cool. It's good to
Um,
know.
let's talk about humor. How do you feel about humor in B2B emails? Good idea or bad idea?
Oh man, I hate to keep giving you coy answers. I guess it just really depends. I'm a big believer in the person who's ultimately going to be on the sales call writing that copy and sort of using, uh, doing their own thing with it, having some fun with it, being creative. I think that the problem becomes over templating, and you have to kind of make the outreach genuine to the person from whom it's coming. And we do this for clients, but it's pretty collaborative. We're going back and forth with them and so on. So overall, I love humor. I think it's great. I guess if you're selling into hospitals, you might have a different sense of humor than if you're selling into, growth stage consumer e-commerce startups or something like that. But yeah, I think it can work wonders. And one thing that is stealable, that we used to do here is if you're putting in an opt out, we often say in our outreach to people, hey, if this isn't interesting, or if you want to make a grown man cry, just let me know and I'll stop bothering you. That's just little things like that I think can really help.
In the book Sales Engagement by Benny Medina, the CEO of Outreach, They break down email personalization into three levels. You can personalize at the account level, and obviously that personalization would work for anybody at a certain account. You can personalize for the role, and that would work for anyone in a specific role. And then he talks about hyper personalization, which is what would get done on a one-by-one basis to a salesperson, to a high prospect target. um, What's your thought on that? I mean, would it be okay to put a joke in there? Or, I mean, how do you train your frontline salespeople to hyper personalize a templated email?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's different cases. I guess to take a step back, I think that's a great way to think about it in those three ways. I guess from what we've seen, the bar has gotten higher in terms of what you need to do to actually get somebody to respond and take it more seriously. So to answer your question, when we're training people up and they're doing research live out there in the field, we're usually identifying a strategy by which they can identify something that's relatively publicly available, and then use that as a way in. So there is that, whatever that is. Maybe it's an article or referencing something that's out there in real time as they're doing research, and kind of doing that on a one by one basis. That is one thing, but what we're starting to do a lot more of now is working backwards, and not so much personalizing the individual messages, but having an almost one size fits all template, but doing it based on a strong personal commonality. So like I mentioned earlier, if we're finding all the C-level people that are a part of the same trade association or part of the same networking group or went to the same college or worked for the same accounts, we then don't have to personalize each and every email. We can just fill in different blanks. And then that becomes somebody that's going to be much more likely to take the meeting, and that scales a lot better. Granted, that's definitely a plug for what we're doing, because that requires a lot of proprietary data and stuff not everyone can do. But I think that on a small scale, you could, the people listening could probably do that. So they might be saying, okay, what would it take to find everybody that, I'm just making this up, it could be a lot of commonalities, but everybody that went to the same college as me, that's within this industry, this company size. Let's see if we can build that list. And now there's a way in, basically. I think the caveat or the rub is that you might not be getting to the ultimate destination. You might be getting an indirect way in, but it's when you're dealing with bigger accounts, which is, our main focus, I think that works pretty well.
Yeah, so you can personalize not just on the account level and role level and hyper personal level. You can also personalize based on interests,
Yeah.
based on places that you worked or went to school. That's really, I think, a great idea. Um, do you have any just sort of tips for prospecting uh, via cold email? Sort of best practices?
Yeah, great question. There's probably a lot. I guess one thing that comes to mind is just trying to figure out the right level of automation is always tough. I think that creates a lot of hand wringing for people, and usually the tendency, is to go towards over automated. And I think the way that we like to think about it is, as soon as somebody is responded, and assuming it's not like taking me off your list kind of situation, assuming it's a relatively warm response, I think there's diminishing returns to trying to automate at that same level, regardless of how much you choose to automate. That level should drop off, and that's a situation where maybe the person who's responded goes into even a different piece of software, or if you're using a big robust thing like Outreach, it goes into a different situation. So that's, that might be kind of like white belt advice for people that are pretty sophisticated at this. I think for newer people, though, it bears repeating. It's just sort of try not to over automate, trying to kind of put the right time into it. Yeah.
What about LinkedIn? Do you take the same approach there, or do you alter your cold messages on LinkedIn from how you present them on email?
Yeah, good question. So LinkedIn, we don't want to do what everybody else is doing, because it's become such a cesspool of people just, doing using LinkedIn in sort of a hard selly way, and saying, hey, here's, trying to get somebody on the phone from LinkedIn and so on, when really it's designed to be more of like a social network, kind of more of a coffee shop sort of vibe. And that reflects the way people use it, right? Because if you think about it, like people might be scrolling on their phones through LinkedIn, they're not really trying to get stuff done. They might be wasting time. They might be like connecting, conversing to some extent. So maybe it's more serious than a Facebook, but it's not really an email. So the way that we use LinkedIn, and we've done different things, is more about putting a face to a name, more about a connection. we're not typically asking people to complete different actions on LinkedIn. And that's how we're thinking of it in terms of outreach. And I think that where LinkedIn, I mean, you might know more about this than I do, but my understanding for where it's going is more towards a Facebook like paid media model. So I'm not sure how valid it's going to be to use it the way that like a lot of salespeople are using it right now in the long term. So that's kind of our experience with it.
If you're interested in how to build more visibility and credibility and influence online through neutral, independent, third party influencers and outlets, join us for the Earned Media Podcast, recorded live weekly on Zoom and distributed on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe at ericschwartzman.com/earned media. Dan, what are your thoughts on image personalization in cold pitch emails?
Yeah, I think it's cool. To be honest, we haven't done a whole lot of it yet. I'd like to this coming year. To me, we'll see where it goes. I think that it could, if everybody starts doing it, I think it could decrease in effectiveness. But I think it's worth a try. I think it probably has to have my hunch or my suspicion is that it's probably going to need to include something else beyond just that, and you're going to have to keep your audience in mind. I think for kind of a fun like younger audience, it might work better than if a 60 or 70-year-old had a CTO at a hospital got it. But it sounds interesting. Yeah.
So I was testing a service called Lemlist.
Yeah, I know Limlist.
And it was kind of buggy, so I didn't actually bite after I tried it for like 90 days. But I did a campaign where I was looking for someone to write a foreword to a book I was
Mhm.
working on. And so I mocked up the book and I took a picture of the book on the shelf at a bookstore. But I left space for the forward by.
Mhm.
And then I just, in the image personalization, put the name of the person that I was asking if they'd write the forward into the image on the book. So it said forward by their name on a bookshelf in a bookstore. And I did great in terms of response. I got better response to that on any email campaign I've ever done before. But I sputtered because I stopped using Lemlist because it was buggy.
Yeah, well, that's probably good feedback for them. Hopefully, they can fix that stuff. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think it kind of harkens back to like the wider strategy. And if you're selling something that's physical or has that that image component, it seems like it could work really well as long as it's not forced or something. I think if you were selling esoteric consulting services, it might be kind of weird to force an image where there isn't an obvious, isn't an obvious option there, but it makes a lot of sense.
You know what? Another reason why I churned from Lemlist is I'm always looking to score all digital interactions through various channels in the CRM against the customer record. And I couldn't integrate that tool and score in my CRM what that if that action was successful or not. So I find that in an effort to achieve vertical integration, I've almost let go of the best of breed options in many cases just because I want that integration.
Yeah, and that could be worth the cost of using these kind of novel and new apps. If you, it probably makes sense to me that the market understanding you're able to get from having everything in one place trumps using some new widget or whatever. So that makes sense for sure.
Hey, what are your top tips for cold calling?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a huge expert on cold calling. I've never, I mean, I've always been in kind of like white collar, kind of selling into bigger company situations. And so my early days when I was selling animated video services to Fortune 500s, we tried it a little bit, and I think the issue was just breaking through. We got better success from email, and didn't really find. And granted, I think we probably didn't have the resources to give it a full shake. And I think cold calling, I mean, I think everything can work. I think that if you have the sales resources and you can put it together and you have situations where you can get the data really good, and have a division of duties, then I think it can work. I think the challenge is now there's just the data is harder because everybody's remote, so depending on the size of the company you're with, you're going to have to play this kind of phone game to break through. And I think it might have diminishing returns if you're selling into larger organizations. I think if you're selling into smaller businesses, brick and mortar, it may work a lot better. It may actually be, your main option. I have friends that do marketing for kind of like smaller businesses, consumer lawyers, like that sort of thing, and they're doing VM drops, they're doing text drops, they're doing lots of cold calling. So I've always been kind of like in more the enterprisey, mid-market to enterprisey space. So I'm not a huge expert on it, but I think that it can work really well. Oop, I think I lost you, Eric. Let's see.
What are your
Oh, there
thoughts
we go.
on boosting open rates and clicks through A/B testing?
Yeah, great question. So open rates, I think, need to be understood the right way. They're more a measure of deliverability in my experience than the snazziness of a subject line, right? So if you have an open rate that might not be great, depending on the market you're selling into, it could vary. If you're selling into the biggest companies on earth, maybe you're going to get a lower open rate. If the smaller ones, I'd say, and this is really roughly speaking, 30%. If you're below that, there's something probably wrong. But what's happening a lot of the times when people see a low open rate is they think, okay, I need to write a better subject line or whatever. But what's really happening is that message is just going to the spam box. So that takes the whole wild world of email deliverability diagnosis, figuring out if it's your domain, figuring out if there's spam keywords, domain reputation, and we're probably not going to. Let me know if I'm getting too far into the weeds, but it's sort of like SEO, but it's not as long term. Like if you get dinged, you could probably come back up again if you leave the domain alone or get at the right activity. And it's an always changing black box algorithm situation. But the main thing to keep in mind is open rate's going to be a measure of that. Most probably 80%. The last 20% of open rate is subject lines, and I think the trends have changed, and we're keeping an eye on them. Where at one point it was about coming up with really funny, creative subject lines. Now I think it's trending more towards specificity and actually having a subject line that says why you're contacting, maybe including personalization, maybe not. That's up to you. But being very clear and genuine with the subject line is kind of what we're seeing to work better now. I think that if you want a lesson in writing subject lines, a good thing to do is click into your spam box or even just in your normal inbox and try to make what you write not look like everything else in terms of capitalizations, in terms of the actual aesthetic. And I think that's a good way to think about open rate. Um, Reply rate is a little bit different, and it's kind of like hard to measure sometimes because it's so qualitative, right? You could have a great reply rate, but it's everyone telling you to go away, and that's no good. So I think you have to kind of diagnose it based on the nature of the responses. But one thing is that if you're getting a whole lot of not interested, that is not good, but it's not as bad because it at least tells you you're probably in the right place. You're selling into the right person. The emails are getting through. You might just need to adjust your copy or something to that effect, or adjust the offer a little bit. So that's one way to diagnose it. And there's probably a lot more I could add from there, but I think just kind of keeping that in mind is useful.
Is there a simple test that you can do to see whether or not your deliverability is any good?
Yes, there are programs that do this. I'm not the one actively with my head, under the hood right now, so I wish I had a good rec for it. But there are deliverability tests. I think if you Google that, you can check it. There's some weird companies that specialize on inbox deliverability. I think though that where things are heading is again like back to personalization, back to these smaller lists. I think it's going to be less of an issue for most people out there if they're doing smaller batch campaigns. It's only when you're trying to send to thousands of people a week that you got to constantly worry about deliverability. So if you're keeping it small, and it's not really worth worrying about until you get to a situation where your open rates are just not happening. And then from there, you got to make sure that that the data is good. I think that's actually perhaps the first starting place is making sure that you have clean data. One thing is you asked earlier about verifying emails. A lot of these email checkers will say these are verified, these are bad, and then there's this big question mark yellow light in the middle. The yellow light probably isn't worth sending to because a lot of those can be bad, and that can hurt deliverability.
Well, what's a good way? What's a good call to action for a B2B email marketing message?
Yeah, we've tried a lot of different things. So I think there's different things that can work. It, it sort of depends on your level of personalization, right? So if you have a strong connection to somebody and a good reason to talk, I don't think you need to spin your wheels trying to figure out the perfect call to action. It's a little sometimes you can oversell it. You can oversell it and put yourself in a worse position than if you just said, "Are you open to a conversation?" I think that if you don't have that luxury, it helps to pose specific times, right? To say, "Hey, are you open on Tuesday at this time?" Because it sort of indicates that okay, this is a real person might have written this. This seems like they're actually being conscientious of my time. So I would use the latter if you have less of a way in. If you have less personalization, and if you do have personalization, I think you don't have to worry about it as much. And sometimes it's better just to keep it light. Are you open to a quick call? I think what doesn't work and what to avoid is the whole Calendly link game. I think once you get agreement, a good thing to say is let me know what works, or if it's easier, feel free to book here. I wouldn't be sending links in that first message though until you get somebody that agrees, and that's for a couple of reasons. For one, links and deliverability tend to clash. You don't want to have too many weird links when you're trying to get the passenger pigeon through. And the second thing is that it's sort of like presumptive and saying, "Hey, use my booking link," as opposed to kind of working around the person you're talking to. Maybe
A
maybe
lot of
not. That
people,
depends.
a
Yeah.
lot of people in email marketing will say it's good if people unsubscribe because it means that you don't want those people on your list if they're unsubscribing. They're not the right people. So it's fine. But I mean, on the other side, you got to be acquiring more email addresses than you lose, or your list is going to disappear. So, what are some good tips for building a high quality email marketing list? Because a lot of people, with white paper downloads or webinar signups, will just use their spam address. They use their Yahoo or their MSN or their Hotmail or some old account that they never check just for the purpose of signing up. So, how do you build a list and how do you get good email addresses?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that we have to make a distinction between inbound and outbound. So if you're talking about, what somebody's opting in and giving you an email to go into an Infusionsoft or a Mailchimp or a HubSpot or whatever, that's going to be different than if you're researching prospects that might not have opted in yet to do outreach, which by the way is completely genuine and legal and a good thing to do, assuming you're contacting the right people in a tasteful way. So that's the first thing. So I think if we're in inbound marketing land, that's less of our specialty. We're more focused on outreach. But if you're doing that, absolutely agree. I think a certain amount of unsubscribes is fine. There's going to be people churning out of it, and so on. I think that if you're an outbound land, right, where you're kind of contacting people that may or may not have opted in, or maybe they have opted in, and you're contacting them directly in order to get a call with them or something to that effect. So these things can kind of merge together. You want to be thinking about it in a way that is kind of a longer game, right? So yeah, there's going to be people that unsubscribe, but if you're doing your research well and you're contacting with personalization and you're contacting people that you are positioned to serve, most people are not going to tell you to go away. They might ignore your email, which is okay. And then you can circle back to them later. So a lot of the times, when we're teaching courses and doing stuff like that, people will say, so are these people just burned once I contact them? And it's like a small percentage of them might be. A small percentage might say, take me off your list or whatever. But most of them won't, and that's where re-engagement comes in. So I think that's a big part of list building is having something that tells you, okay, it can be really simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it. These are people that we haven't contacted in more than 90 days, and at that point, that's where you might be re-engaging with content. Maybe you have a webinar. You might be referencing, refreshing them easily, respecting their time, and so on from there.
Dan, talk to us about KPIs. If an agency hires you to get a meeting so that they can pitch new business, what sort of if you're not working against open rates or click throughs, what are you working against? Meetings, or because if you work against meetings, often when you sort of outsource sales, you get all these crappy meetings. So how do you do a KPI that works for the client and keeps them paying you for the long term?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And we like to be really clear on what's in our control and what's not, So the thing that we have shifted towards now is more of an account-based model whereby we're identifying accounts with our clients, getting on the same level for getting approval on that list, and then basically doing outreach to high level people with those accounts and doing specific outreach and guaranteeing that they're going to see it. And then from there, there's meetings happening or there's not. I'd say, well, we don't guarantee this, but what we tend to forecast and what most of our clients are averaging is at least a qualified meeting a week, and we have some people getting dozens. Other times we'll hit a soft spot and we'll need to re-experiment and redo different things again. But our value prop, mainly just for ourselves, for Sales Schema, is being a better, faster, cheaper option than getting a BDR, than getting an in-house BDR. Because I think, a lot of our clients' value props are like this too. What happens is that role is often higher, but that BDR is rarely supported in the right way unless you have a sophisticated sales organization, which most agencies are not. That person's going to need data. They're going to need copy. They're going to need somebody that's operating in the background to make the machine work. And that's what we're promising, is being better, faster, cheaper option than building that in-house.
We think about the impact of the pandemic on business, and obviously restaurants and hospitality and sports and theater and performing arts. All that world has been gutted, as have conventions and conferences. But what we really don't talk about that much is the impact of the loss of conferences and conventions on sales in B2B channels. Deals get done at those events, and often it's sort of the digital laggards that aren't as savvy online that sort of got around that by going to conferences and by pressing the flesh and having steak dinners and playing golf and all that stuff that was done in the pre-pandemic days to close sales. And obviously that's not happening anymore. So if you are interested in figuring out how to pivot to digital, I just wrote a white paper that you can download at ericschwartzman.com/pivot. It's the guide to the digital pivot. And if you're looking to pivot to digital, and now's the time, check it out. Dan, if somebody wants help generating leads for their agency, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, salesschema.com. And there's, a big contact link there. So that's probably the best place for a consultation. Beyond that, happy to talk over email about anything. Dan at salesschema.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this, and looking forward to listening to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast in the near future.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
That's it. We're not recording anymore. We're still live on social media. And in fact, while you can stream from Zoom to social media, you can't stop streaming from Zoom to social media without ending
funny.
the call.
Yeah.
So we will say goodbye to one another with an audience.
Okay, cool. That's funny. I need to mess with it. I haven't tried it yet. So I didn't know, I had no idea I could do that.
Actually, I'll get it for you right now, because I wrote a blog post on streaming to Zoom on streaming to social networks from Zoom. It's actually doing really well, this blog post for me right now.
Cool.
And I'll put it in the chat for you. It's really easy.
That's good to know. Yeah, we need to get
that's how you set it up.
Streaming game going. I think that's cool.
And you can go to as many destinations as you like. For LinkedIn, cool. You need a LinkedIn Live account.
Yeah.
And that requires, a connection, or, they have to want to give you one because it's in beta. But you can go to LinkedIn Live. You can go to your Facebook pages. You can go to your Facebook group, and you can hit Twitter via Periscope. So yeah, cool. It's great.
That's good to know. Yeah, we need to figure that out, I think. I think there's something to the live element. I guess it would be interesting to see if there's like a Q&A thing you could sort of do as well, but I maybe they haven't figured that out yet. Yeah.
Well, you can do Q&A. There's a Q&A tool on
Mhm.
Zoom,
Okay.
and it has
Yeah. Yeah.
upvoting.
Right. I
So
know
if
about
you
that. Yeah.
have a busy event, you can use the upvoting to decide which ones to answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Cool. Good. Good to know. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, hey, good
Awesome, man.
luck in Brooklyn. And
Thank you.
I'm running a pretty thick backlog. I'm at least 4 weeks behind.
Yeah. No worries. We have
So
the same issue.
I'll let you know. I will definitely let you know when it goes out. And then,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sounds good, man. Would love to have you on sometime too if you're interested. So we'll
Oh, I'd
reach out about
love
that.
that, man.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
that,
Sounds
man.
good.
Yeah, if you want to do anything around earned media,
Yeah.
digital
Yeah.
PR, love to
Cool.
do that.
Yeah. Let me send you kind of a link, like I sent, like you sent me, and then I'll do some research and stuff and figure out some questions.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. You too, man. Appreciate it.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.